air hung thick with the scent of magnolias and something else, desperation. In the grand drawing room of Bellerose Plantation, a conversation was taking place that would shatter 3 lives and echo through generations. Charles Beaumont stood by the window, his back to his wife. At 38, he was a broken man in a powerful man's body. The riding accident 3 years earlier had left him unable to father children, a fact that haunted him more than the chronic pain in his spine. His family name, his legacy, his very manhood, all of it hinged on an heir, and time was running out. "Isabel," he said, his voice hollow, "we must discuss the matter again." Isabel Beaumont sat rigid in her chair, her hands folded in her lap like white birds at rest. At 32, she remained beautiful. Dark hair swept up in the fashion of the day, green eyes that once sparkled with intelligence, now dulled by years of silent suffering. She knew what was coming. They had circled this conversation for months, each time Charles growing more desperate, more insistent. "There is nothing to discuss, Charles. There is everything to discuss." He turned now, and she could see the anguish in his face. "My brother's letters grow more pointed each week. If we do not produce an heir, Bellerose passes to him. Everything our family built for 5 generations, gone. Then let it go to your brother. You don't understand." Charles crossed the room, kneeling before her, taking her cold hands in his. "Without an heir, you will have nothing. When I die, you will be cast out. My brother's wife despises you. She will see you penniless, Isabel, penniless and alone." Isabel pulled her hands away. "I will not do what you ask." Charles stood, his face hardening. "It is not a request. It is a necessity." The plan was simple in its horror. Charles had selected one of his slaves, a man named Elijah, 26 years old, strong, intelligent, of mixed heritage, with features refined enough that a child might pass as Charles's own. Isabel would be required to allow this man into her bed until she conceived. It would be done discreetly, clinically. No one beyond the 3 of them would ever know. "I have made the arrangement," Charles said flatly. "He will come to your chambers tonight. I will be away in New Orleans for a week. When I return, it will be done. And if I refuse," Charles's eyes went cold, "then you refuse your own future. The law gives me authority over you as it gives me authority over every soul on this plantation. I am trying to save us both, Isabel. Do not mistake my desperation for cruelty." That night, Isabel locked her bedroom door and sat in the darkness, trembling with rage and fear and something else she could not name. She heard the soft knock at midnight, then again at 1. At 2, the knocking stopped. Charles left for New Orleans at dawn. For 3 days, Isabel remained in her room, seeing no one, speaking to no one. On the 4th day, she called for the house servant, Marie, a woman who had been with the plantation since before Isabel arrived as a bride 14 years earlier. "I need to speak with Elijah," Isabel said. Marie's eyes widened. "Mistress, that ain't. Bring him to the library. At midnight. Tell no one." Marie hesitated, then nodded. She understood more than she would ever say. That night, Isabel waited in the library, a single candle burning. When Elijah entered, she saw him clearly for the first time. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face a study in careful neutrality. He kept his eyes down, his hands at his sides. "Look at me," Isabel said. Slowly, Elijah raised his eyes. They were brown, flecked with gold, and in them, Isabel saw intelligence, wariness, and something that shocked her, pity. "Did Master Charles explain what he wants from you?" Isabel asked. "Yes, ma'am." "And what do you think of it?" Elijah's jaw tightened. "It ain't my place to think anything, ma'am. That's not an answer." For a long moment he was silent. "Then I think Master Charles is afraid. Afraid men do desperate things." Isabel nodded slowly. "I want to ask you something, and I want the truth. If I refuse this arrangement, what will happen to you?" Elijah's face remained impassive, but his voice carried weight. "Master Charles told me if I didn't comply, I'd be sold south, to the sugar fields. The sugar plantations of southern Louisiana were death sentences. Men lasted 3, maybe 4 years before the work and the heat and the brutality killed them. It was the threat every slave feared most. So you have no choice," Isabel whispered. "No, ma'am, no more than you do." Something in his words unlocked something in Isabel. For the first time, she saw her situation clearly. She was property, just as he was. Her cage was gilded, his was iron, but they were both trapped in a system that denied them agency, humanity, choice. "What is your real name?" Isabel asked suddenly. Elijah looked startled. "Ma'am, your name, the one your mother gave you." A long pause. "Elijah is my name. My mother, she named me after the prophet. Said he was a man who stood up when everyone else bowed down." Isabel felt tears prick her eyes. "Elijah, I am going to tell you something, and you must listen carefully." Over the next hour, Isabel laid out a plan that terrified her even as she spoke it. She would not comply with Charles's demand, not in the way he expected, but she would not condemn Elijah to the sugar fields either. There was a third way, desperate and dangerous, but possible. Isabel had money, a small inheritance from her mother, kept secret from Charles, hidden in a false bottom of her jewelry box. $3,000 in gold certificates. Enough to buy Elijah's freedom and passage north. Enough to start over. "I will tell Charles I am pregnant," Isabel said. "I will pad my dresses, mimic the symptoms. In 9 months, I will stage a stillbirth. It will buy you time to escape. I have contacts in New Orleans, Quakers who help. People like you, they can get you to Ohio." Elijah stared at her as if she had grown a second head. "Why? Why would you risk this for me?" "Because I am tired of being complicit," Isabel said, her voice breaking. "I have lived in this house for 14 years, watching people bought and sold like cattle. I have said nothing, done nothing. I told myself I had no power. But I do have power. This one time I have a choice, and I choose to help you. And what happens to you when Master Charles discovers the lie?" Isabel's smile was bitter. "He will be furious. He may cast me out. But I will not be forced into this. I will not participate in his plan. If I am to be penniless and alone, so be it. At least I will be free of this." Elijah was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "You're asking me to trust you. White mistress asking a slave to trust her with his life. I know, I have given you no reason to trust me, but I am asking anyway." Another long silence. Then Elijah nodded. "What do you need me to do?" Over the next week, they worked in secret. Isabel claimed illness, keeping to her chambers. Marie, who understood far more than she let on, helped smuggle Elijah into the library each night. They planned every detail. Elijah would leave in 3 weeks, on a moonless night, carrying a letter of introduction to the Quaker family in New Orleans and half of Isabel's gold. The rest would follow once he was safely north. Charles returned from New Orleans to find Isabel pale and withdrawn but composed. She informed him, coldly, that the deed was done and she believed herself with child. Charles's relief was palpable and disgusting. He embraced her, tears in his eyes, thanking God and fate and every saint he could name. Isabel felt nothing but contempt. As the weeks passed, Isabel played her part perfectly. She complained of morning sickness, of fatigue, of cravings. She let out her dresses, moved slowly, rested her hand on her belly. Charles hovered, solicitous and proud. He wrote to his brother, triumphant. The heir was coming. Bellerose was saved. At night, Isabel lay awake, counting the days until Elijah's escape. But something unexpected happened. Isabel began to spend time with Elijah under the guise of instructing him in household tasks, plausible enough that Charles never questioned it. In those stolen hours, they talked, really talked. Elijah spoke of his mother, sold when he was 12, of his sister, somewhere in Georgia, lost to him forever, of the books he had secretly taught himself to read, risking a whipping if he was caught, of his dreams of freedom, of a life where he could walk down a street without fear. Isabel spoke of her own cage, of the marriage arranged by her father to settle debts, of the loneliness of being an ornament in a grand house, powerless and voiceless, of the slow death of her spirit. They were, in their way, kindred souls. And then, one night in the library, as Elijah recited a passage from the Bible, the story of Moses leading his people to freedom, Isabel reached out and took his hand. Elijah froze. "Mistress, Isabel. My name is Isabel." "Isabel," he whispered, and the way he said her name undid something in her chest. What happened next was not part of the plan. It was not calculated or strategic. It was two people, imprisoned in different ways, reaching for connection in the darkness. They made love in the library, on the Persian rug, beneath the shelves of books that neither of them truly owned. It was tender and desperate and utterly forbidden. Afterward, lying in his arms, Isabel wept. "What have we done?" "Something real," Elijah said softly. "Maybe the only real thing in this whole damned place." They both knew it could never happen again. The risk was too great. But it had happened once, and that once would have consequences neither of them anticipated. 4 weeks later, Isabel realized she was actually pregnant. The irony was cruel and perfect. She had lied to save Elijah, and now the lie was truth. But the father was not the man Charles intended. The father was a man Charles would kill if he knew. Elijah was scheduled to leave in 3 days. Isabel called him to the library one final time. She told him the truth and watched his face drain of color. "Go," she said fiercely. "You must go as planned. Nothing has changed." "Everything has changed," Elijah said, his voice raw. "That's my child. No, it is Charles's heir. It is the thing that will save Bellerose. You were never here, Elijah. Do you understand? For your safety and mine and this child's, you were never here." Elijah reached for her, but she stepped back. "If you stay, they will kill you. You know this. If Charles even suspects, he will hang you from the oak tree and make everyone on this plantation watch. And then he will cast me out and send the child to an orphanage. This is the only way." "I love you," Elijah said suddenly. "I know I got no right to say it, but I do." Isabel closed her eyes. "And I love you. Which is why you have to go." 3 nights later, Elijah vanished. Charles raged, convinced he had run off, but the loss of one slave was minor compared to the joy of the coming heir. He increased patrols, but Elijah was already in New Orleans, hidden by the Quakers, waiting for passage north. Isabel carried the pregnancy in silence. She felt the baby move and wondered if it would have Elijah's eyes. She lay beside Charles at night and felt like a stranger in her own skin. In March of 1848, Isabel gave birth to a son. Charles wept with joy, cradling the baby, proclaiming him the future of Bellerose. The child had dark hair, green eyes like Isabel's, and a strong cry. They named him Henry. Only Isabel knew the truth. Only Marie, who had delivered the baby, saw the brief flicker of recognition in the child's features and said nothing. Isabel raised Henry with fierce love and terrible guilt. She taught him to read and write, to think for himself, to question the world around him. Charles adored the boy, never suspecting. When Henry was 10 years old, the Civil War began. Charles fought for the Confederacy and died at Antietam. His brother inherited Bellerose but died 2 years later of dysentery. The plantation fell to creditors. Isabel and Henry moved to New Orleans, poor but free of the poisonous legacy of Bellerose. One day in 1867, a man came to their door. He was older, his hair graying, but his eyes were the same, brown flecked with gold. Elijah had made it north. He had fought with the Union Army. He had survived. Henry, now 19, looked between his mother and this stranger, and something in his face shifted. "Mama?" Isabel took her son's hand and then Elijah's hand. "Henry, there is something you need to know." The truth came out slowly, painfully. Henry struggled with rage and confusion and grief for the father he thought he'd known. But in time he came to understand. Elijah stayed in New Orleans. He and Isabel never married. The scandal would have been too great. But they lived as neighbors, and everyone who mattered knew the truth. Henry became a lawyer, one of the first black lawyers in Louisiana, fighting for civil rights in the brutal years of Reconstruction. He married a school teacher and had 4 children. He told them their grandfather's story, all of it, the pain and the courage and the impossible choices. Isabel lived to see her grandchildren, to hold them and tell them that freedom is not given but taken, one dangerous choice at a time. When she died in 1889, Elijah held her hand. Henry stood at the foot of the bed. The last words Isabel spoke were, "I chose right," and in the tangle of history and hurt and love, perhaps she had. The Bellerose Plantation burned to the ground in 1871, struck by lightning, reduced to ash and memory. The land was sold, parceled out, built over. Today a shopping center stands where the great house once loomed. But Henry's descendants still live in Louisiana. They know their story. They carry it forward. And in the archives of Tulane University there is a letter, written in 1885 by Henry Beaumont to his children, that tells the whole truth. The powerless master who tried to control lives like chess pieces, the mistress who found courage in the darkest moment, the slave who risked everything for a chance at freedom, and the love that was born in the margins of a brutal world. History is written by the powerful, but the truth lives in the margins, waiting to be found. This is one of those truths.